Hi, I'm Mark Regev.
And I'm Ruthie Blum.
And we are here for another episode 8 of Israel Undiplomatic. And we're ready to go. And let's start. Ruthie, have you got, we always try to start with something personal. Do you have something that happened to you in this last week?
Well, it didn't happen to me. It just happened that I noticed that when I shared a certain story on social media, it went viral, even though it wasn't my story. But I really have to read it because it really is to capture what was so moving about this story and why I think people on the left, on the right, everywhere, religious, secular people were sharing this all over the place. It goes like this. It's a photo of a soldier, a female soldier, next to a man, a bus driver. So on the left is Noah, a combat soldier in the IDF. She got onto a public bus in Israel and sat next to the driver. They chatted, and she shared a bit about her missions. She also mentioned that she had just left the field and hadn't had a chance to eat. The driver pulled over by a restaurant, took money from his pocket, and told her, "There will be no hungry soldiers on my bus. With everything you do for the country, it's the least I can do for you. Now go get yourself something to eat." The whole bus waited while Noah went to grab some food. She posted this photo and asked that we share the story to thank and celebrate the kind driver. I shared it because, I got tears in my eyes almost when I read it, and I shared it from somebody else who had shared it. And then it went and went and went. It went viral, and rightly so. Because I think the reason is it reminded us, occasionally we need a reminder of what is so special about Israel and why we always say things like, oh, only in Israel, and not in the negative way, in the positive way. We're a family, and, it was really nice to have this sort of break in arguments, politics, war disagreements. This story is a quintessential, lovely Israeli story.
But I agree. First of all, I agree. It's a great story, and it represents something wonderful about this country that we both live in. But it's also political, because you said in your introduction that she is not only a soldier, she's a combat soldier. And there are some more conservative elements in Israeli society that don't like the idea of women going to the army at all. They should do other sort of service. And secondly, that women should not be in combat. Where are you on those issues, Ruthie?
Well, there was a time years and years ago when I read all those arguments in the United States about women in combat and all that and why it's terrible or not terrible. And then when I came to Israel in 1977, and then I saw that all the women serve in the army and all that, and I saw no problem with it. Although in those years, there weren't so many combat soldiers. The women might have been part of combat units, but their jobs were not to go out into the battlefield. They had serious jobs, some of them clerical, some of them social work-like jobs, but they weren't in combat. So I have no problem with people who want to be in combat and girls who want to be in combat. Although I have to say that October 7th made me nervous because of the rapes. I mean, now, that might not be a good excuse. It's not their fault they were raped, but it does sort of remind us that in war and prisoners of war, we do know that the girls still being held in captivity are being sexually abused. And so it does make me, as I say, that doesn't make me against women in combat. It makes me think about it.
Over the weekend, I had reason to visit the cemetery in Modi'in, the city of Modi'in where I live. And Modi'in's a medium-sized city, over 100,000 people. And the military section of the cemetery, is there's more than 20 soldiers that have been killed since October 7th, on October 7th and following. And amongst all the men are 2 women. And it says on the graves of both women, Nafla Bakrav, they
fell in battle.
And there are more and more women who want to volunteer for combat duty, and you have to respect them. And obviously they know the risks. And I think it's an important thing, and we should encourage it. But then if we want to go into the bigger issue of this week, which was the Supreme Court decision on Ultra-Orthodox military service, a unanimous decision by, 7 justices to say that the Haredim should be doing their military service.
I thought it was 9.
9, sorry.
Okay.
Stand corrected. Math was never my strong point with you. But the point is this, that if you want Haredim in the army, and I think most Israelis will agree that the Haredim should be in the army, but then you have to say, make the army more friendly for Haredim. It has to be a Haredi-friendly environment. And then you have an issue of making male-only spaces, because it's clear any Haredi-only environment, you're not going to have these young women combat soldiers side to side with these Haredi men. I think that has to be clear.
Exactly. You have to respect their wishes. But here's the thing. There's also, I have to say, we have to really be careful because there's so much both hypocrisy and politics involved here right now, okay? Because the bill that was on the table was one that actually the opposition this time around opposed, even though it was a bill that they supported last year. And on the grounds they claimed that the reason is because now we're at war, and we're at war, we need more soldiers. Now, that's true, but what about all the Haredim who came to the recruitment office and were sent away? We don't have any place for you. So there's also that going on. And it's true, there's an element not only of not being with women, but the food. The food has to be particularly, not just any old kosher, okay? It's got to be blessed by the right rabbis and all that. It's complicated. But also, at the moment that we should be fighting over this. By the way, the decision that said now the High Court of Justice ruling said all people in Israel should be conscripted equally. But, nobody thinks that about the Arab Israelis.
I do. I think Arab Israelis should be doing either military service, or if that's not what they choose, a non-military national service. There's no reason that they can't be in the fire brigade.
Could do also.
The Haredim could do also the fire brigade and the prison service, and there's all sorts of, even for the emergency rescue crews and so forth. They could be working in their own communities to deal with some of the social issues they challenge. There's a whole issue of crime in the Arab community.
Exactly.
Surely we could do with more policemen, Arab policemen.
But then what about all the secular people? I have to say, in all these discussions about who goes to the army, who doesn't go to the army, I've got news for you. When I first came to Israel, it was, everybody was in the army, and if they weren't, because of a medical reason or I don't know, a psychiatric reason, they were ashamed to say so. And it was, as time went on and my kids grew up, suddenly it was just as cool to be told that, no, you can go straight to university, or you can go study art abroad. Suddenly there's a whole community here of people who are not going to the army, and the only reason was they said, I don't want to waste 3 years when I can be starting my career. What about those people?
So the truth is there are those people, but if I think you look at the statistics of the general Israeli population, which, let's say, the secular Israelis and the national religious, so over 80% do the army. Right, let's be clear. Now, maybe it's down from 90+%, yes,
right.
But it's still the overwhelming majority do the army.
Right.
And I do agree with you, in certain social groups it's become maybe more acceptable not to do, but it'll be interesting for me to see, and will October 7th change that? People feel, they are defending the country against real threats, and will that make the number go up again? I mean, where I live in Modi'in, we have one of the highest rates of people going to the army than any place in Israel. We have a competition with Shoam, who has more people people in combat units. Yeah, the Haredim. The problem is it's they're not even close to 50%. They're and this is an entire community, and demographically, if today the Haredim are about 14% of the general Israeli population, by 2040 they're going to be 25% of the population. They're a growing demographic, and it's simply unsustainable that this growing demographic, and that's because they have large families and so forth, so they can be expected to grow as part of the population, but that they're not fully integrated into the workforce is an economic problem, and the fact that they're not doing their fair army service, it's simply not sustainable. And it's sometimes you need a crisis to solve problems. So Israel's in a crisis. We're fighting a war. The army is short of soldiers, and maybe we need a crisis to bring about a change that a lot of people wanted to see for a long time now. Now, you can tell me correctly that well, by the time we get them in the army and trained, the war in Gaza might be over. And that could be true. But I think, what has October 7th showed us? That if in the past we thought we could have a small, compact, and smart army, no, we need soldiers on the border. I'll give you one example.
Okay.
One example. You've got all these people who live in the Sharon area in central Israel, right? And they live opposite, on the other side of the security fence is Tulkarem, right? And other large Palestinian communities. These people never thought, they never had this concept in their mind that suddenly you could get terrorists storming across the frontier and killing them. We need more and more soldiers.
By the way, Mark, excuse me, some of us did think so. Okay. We know who didn't think so. Okay.
But it wasn't part of the Israeli psyche, the way it is now. And the idea that we need, a larger army, we need a presence on all our borders, we have to be able to respond. I mean, we do need these people, not just for the fighting immediately now in Gaza, but we will need them, unfortunately, in the years to come. And if history is any test of what will be in the future, we'll need them also in the decades to come. And the idea that more and more Haredim should be in the army, must be in the army, it's necessary for them to be in the army, I think that's crucial.
Okay, I just think that we should do it a little bit more delicately maybe, but in any case, what the point you raise is disturbing. It's both reassuring and disturbing. It's reassuring that someone like you is aware of the fact that we have to always have our weapons at the
Someone like me, I take that as an insult. Ruthie, I firmly believe, that Israel has to be strong. It has to be strong militarily. It has to be strong economically. It has to be strong diplomatically. It has to be strong internally, right? So we can meet the challenges.
Right.
Anyone who believes the Middle East is suddenly going to become, we used to say like Europe, but Europe's not going through an easy period now either, right? We live in a dangerous and unstable part of the world. Any peace relations we have with any of the Arab countries is all based on Israeli strength. And the whole idea that somehow, anytime soon, we don't have to be a strong country militarily, that's just an illusion.
No, but right, that's correct. But it does, talking about that right now makes it sound as though all this talk about our now coming to some kind of completion in the fighting in Rafah and that preparing to move north to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. When we talk about the fact that we need to start training all these other soldiers who haven't, that for the future, what that tells us is that we don't actually believe that there's going to be peace with our neighbors, or certainly not with the Palestinians or anybody who sides with Iran in any near future, certainly not in our lifetime. And therefore, it's not just that we need it just in case. It's that we know we can never stop being vigilant. And by the way, that brings us to this question of what happens after we basically kill off Hamas in Gaza. All right, not every terrorist, but we kill off Hamas in Gaza. And then everyone's talking about what about the day after? What about the day after? And I say, well, for one thing, for sure, Israel has to have control there, military control, and perhaps also some settlement, because otherwise it'll just return to be a terrorist base, and we can't afford that. And by the way, anybody who cares about Palestinian lives should probably welcome Jewish settlement there.
So I beg to disagree. I would even say I think you're wrong on that issue. And
yes,
it's not just,
you think I'm wrong.
Just such as Mark Regev, the Prime Minister himself, he gave an interview this week to Channel 14, which is the right-wing nationalist network. And Netanyahu was asked there about this very same issue, and he said it's simply not realistic to go back to Gaza. Now, you have to respect, and it wasn't popular that he said it there.
No.
So you have to respect him, that he was willing to stand up at part of his base when he takes these ideas about going back to settle Gaza, and he says they're not on the table at all. And I respect a politician who can stand up to his base. But having said that, right, I think it's the idea of settling Gaza takes you back to a situation where we were before disengagement. And we can have a debate about if Sharon did the right thing or not the right thing. But I think Netanyahu is correct when he says that anyone who thinks that resettling Gaza is a panacea for a more peaceful future, that is, unfortunately, a myth. It's just not going to help. And I think if we talk about what we need to do to make Israel stronger and more secure in the future, to say settlement in Gaza is a recipe for that, I just don't see any logic to the argument.
I don't think it's any recipe. I just like to remind you what happened prior to disengagement, okay? Because, there's a lot of rewriting of history, and also people have short memories. But what spurred disengagement, even though as time went on, even Sharon himself sort of changed the impetus for it. But the real reason was this. Every single day, Palestinian suicide bombers were coming in from Gaza, blowing themselves up on buses. They were allowed to enter all this in Israel freely. Every day, our kids had to go on a school bus, or all the parents were driving their kids to school because buses were blowing up. Suicide bombers were blowing themselves up in discotheques and cafes and all that. And Israelis were saying, do something, just like they're saying now about, bring the hostages back and end the war and do something. At that time, we were saying, do something. We can't live like this where these terrorists are blowing themselves up. And his do something solution was, we're going to build a wall. We're going to pull out every last Jew from every last nice, pretty home that we encourage them to purchase and settle. We're going to pull them out of there and put up a fence. And that's it. And say, okay, Gaza, you're on your own. Do what you want with it. Make it into Singapore. Don't make it into Singapore. You have a border with Egypt, fine. And then, but if one rock comes over that fence from a terrorist, then we have the legitimacy to blitz the crap out of them. Guess what? We knew at the time, some of us, those of us who totally opposed this plan, said, oh, come on, one CNN camera or something at that border. I'd like to see you do something when someone throws a rock over there. Well, we've seen what happened after that. And I will say, sadly, the kibbutzim on the border now actually supported that because they said, yeah, we don't like those settlers there. So now they're the ones on the border. The point being that I don't think it's a panacea. I think that this business of no, we don't want it, that we by now have got to stop thinking that we don't have legitimacy to do things that are for our safety.
So I'm not convinced that it enhances Israeli safety building settlements in Gaza. I don't see it as a collect allocation of resources. I think it could also stop us. When we want to talk about Israel's future, we have an opportunity. I was at a conference this week and there was a panel and there were some people from the Arab countries, and which is interesting. There were people there from Saudi Arabia and from Bahrain. And we've been fighting, this bloody war in Gaza, and Al Jazeera has been broadcasting, what it's been broadcasting. And yet people will still come from Arab countries to participate in a seminar or conference in Israel. And it says something. It says something. This war's been going on for 9 months, and with all the reporting and, all this stuff about Israel killing babies and all this, they're still here and they want to make peace with us. The Bahrainis already have and the Saudis could. And I think if one talks about Israeli strategic interests, I'll give you an example. When Menachem Begin made peace with Egypt, right, the treaty was signed in 1979, right? That's how many years ago now, Ruthie? I told you before, my math is no good, but it's like, it's
40
years. 45 years. This year will be 45 years. 45 years, all right?
Yeah.
There were people, because peace with Egypt involved taking down settlements in northern Sinai. And at the time in Israel, there were people out there, including the current head of the National Security Council, who were out there demonstrating, saying this is a mistake. We don't take down settlements. But looking back, 45 years after the event, is Israel stronger and safer because of the peace treaty with Egypt? I don't know what you think, Ruthie, but I think Israel is definitely safer and stronger. Now, if there's a chance to move forward with Saudi Arabia, which we've spoken about this program on this program in the past, the Saudi Arabians have a special status in the Arab world, they have a special status in the Muslim world. If they normalize ties with us, right, and if building settlements in Gaza is going to prevent that from happening, right, I think it's a no-brainer. You've got to look and say what's really important for Israel's security, and you've got to say what is less important. And I think there's
that's if you believe that the Saudis really care at all about the Palestinians.
No. We've had this conversation before. I agree with you that it's not like in the past that across the Arab world, people are not letting the Palestinians dictate their national security to them anymore. In the past, the Palestinians had a veto on Arab countries making peace with Israel, right? And that's changed. But between that and not having to tick the box and there's something on the Palestinian issue, that's a bridge too far. It's clear the Arab countries who want peace with us aren't allowing the Palestinians to dictate their foreign policy anymore. That's a good thing. But to say they're willing to ignore the Palestinian issue, they need, for their own audiences, for their own internal consumption, they need to say, well, we got this issue. It's like, let's remember, we got the Abraham Accords because Netanyahu gave up annexation. Ruthie, was that a mistake?
By the way, that's a good point that you're making here.
Yeah.
That's not exactly why we got the Abraham Accords. Yes, he had announced that we're going to annex part of Judea and Samaria, and he gave a date even.
Yeah.
But just before that date arrived, then the Abraham Accords were signed and all that. And so, yes, of course, I was for that because I thought the most important thing about those accords was that finally Netanyahu, what he'd been trying to tell the world for years, was that the path to peace does not pass through Ramallah and the Palestinians, and it has nothing to do. We make peace with our Arab neighbors, and then the Palestinians can join on. So I was a little disappointed about the non-annexing because of one reason, and that is that, again, the concept of whatever happens and whatever is in anybody's interest, we have to give up territory. And there I have a big problem with it because we know that it has the opposite effect. It always does. Appeasement always has the opposite effect. So here I was a little nervous about that. I said, okay, fine. He gave that in. Trump said, if you do that, fine. And that was wonderful. But look what's happening now. Now, because of appeasement or because of our concern not to lose our allies in Washington, etc., and we're being careful not to kill too many Palestinians, watch how our Abraham Accords partners and Saudis, they're suddenly saying, oh, don't commit genocide. They're coming up with their false narratives in order to say, listen, if you don't beat the crap out of Gaza.
Second time today you've used that word.
Well, because I wanted to use a different word, but I was trying to be delicate. Okay?
I'm not sure delicacy works with you.
No,
Ruthie.
it doesn't. But I'm still, that's my level of... The point is they're watching us, and they want to see us win, and they want to see us pulverize those Iran-backed terrorists. And therefore, this business is saying, no, maybe we shouldn't settle here and we shouldn't...
No, but the settlement's a different issue. They want us to pulverize these Iranian allies. They want this to end with Hamas destroyed as a military machine. They want this to end when Hamas no longer rules the Gaza Strip. On that, they may not say it every day, but that's what they want, yes? But there's a difference between that and the issue of settlement. And I just urge you, I think, we might want a lot of things, but we've got to do what is, as the Prime Minister said, what is realistic. And what is realistic is to defeat Hamas, and we will, and to make peace agreements with other Arab countries, hopefully with Saudi Arabia.
And what about military control in Gaza?
So I agree. Who's
going to rule Gaza? You tell me.
There are two issues here. It's clear for the foreseeable future, we're going to have an overriding Israeli security control because no one else will do the job. That's for the foreseeable future. But then you have to ask the following question, Ruthie, and it's a tough question, and I don't have a good answer for you. But of course, Israel has to be in charge of security. Israel has to make sure that there's not a rebirth of a terrorist organization. We have to prevent arms smuggling, and no one else will do it. We'll have to do it. But when we talk about civil affairs, right, who is in charge of making sure that someone doesn't commit crime in Gaza, that someone isn't parking when they shouldn't park? In other words, do we really want to be the person that, stops husbands from beating their wives in Gaza? Is that the job of the Israeli military? In other words, if there is some sort of civil authority, local Palestinian civil authority, to make sure that sort of day-to-day law and order is carried out, surely that is preferential for Israel, that it be done by someone else.
Right, but the trouble with that is, okay, in order for that to be done by someone else, and the Palestinian Authority that is no better than Hamas, I don't care what anybody says, but I'll tell you...
I disagree on that. I don't like the Palestinian Authority, but they are distinguishable from Hamas. It's like there's this movie that both of us grew up with,
right.
Dr. Strangelove, Peter Sellers, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
So there's the crazy American general in the movie who's talking about nuclear war, and he talks about two distinguishable... regrettable but distinguishable outcomes. So I agree with you, the Palestinian Authority is problematic with a capital P. But is it distinguishable from Hamas? Yes.
Yes and no, but that's, at the moment, That's for another argument, all right?
I
But
think-
one thing we do know
Yes.
is that our ridiculous fantasy that, okay, now that we have that, now we have the Palestinian Authority, and they have to police their own society, and then you give them weapons. And guess who they like to kill with those weapons, Mark? So I have no sympathy anymore for any of them. And I know, and I think it's a big
But
lie.
so
that
what is
they
your
want-
solution? Who should be in charge of law and order on the civil side in Gaza? You really want your son and other Israeli soldiers to be running around the streets of Ramallah and making sure the garbage is being collected?
No, but
Not
making
Ramallah, I meant-
no,
well,
making sure
Gaza.
the garbage is collected. You don't need weapons for that, unless, of course, you have, unless it's Gaza, of course, which
Yeah.
probably you do in that case, right? No, I'm saying that in the absence of a solution, we don't always know what the solution is. In an absence of a solution, we always say, well, we can't do that. Like you just said, we can't do that because that won't work. We can't rule over these people. We can't do that. And then we choose an option that endangers us. So I would say, if we're talking about not realistic, why don't I get to choose which option is...
But you really want the Israeli army to be in charge of civil issues?
Until there's a better solution, because I no longer trust that terrorists are going to come and infiltrate the border. I no longer trust. Look what's happening with the humanitarian aid. Yes, we should have been the ones distributing it and shooting at any Hamas guy who came to steal it. Okay, now we have the international community, which, by the way, all it does is accuse us of withholding aid. Hamas, they're killing everybody who comes in with the aid trucks. Come on. Yes, by all rights, we should have been doing that.
There was an interview on CNN this week, and a well-known Israeli leftist, Ami Ailon, said what we have to learn from this. I don't know if you saw this.
I saw it, and I tore my hair out.
When you've got lots of hair, you can lose. Right, but what I was going to say is the following. He said Israelis can learn from October 7th that this is about occupation, right? What is the truth here? As we said a moment ago, Sharon pulled out of Gaza, rightly or wrongly, you think wrongly. He took down all the settlements, and he pulled back to what border did Sharon pull back to? He pulled back to the 1967 border.
Yep.
Now, when Hamas talks about occupation, what are they talking about? They're talking about Haifa,
Yep.
about Modi'in, where I live.
That's right.
They're talking about Tel Aviv.
That's right.
It's
By the way,
all
not just
occupied.
Hamas. They're just Hamas. Fatah, the leader of the, I won't call him president, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, his entire press, school books, everything, sermons, the whole state
But
of Israel.
I have to tell you, though, once again, I'm not going to justify anything the Palestinian Authority does. Because, I mean, their failure to condemn October 7th and the fact that so many of them have endorsed it, right?
And participated in it.
Yes, Fatah. No excuses whatsoever. Okay. But just as there's a difference between, let's say, ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood, and there's a difference between Nasserism and maybe Baathism, and there are distinguishes there.
You make a distinction.
I do make a distinction. And I also think, look, October 7th was Hamas, and they exposed themselves for what they are.
And Islamic Jihad.
And
by the
Islamic
way.
Jihad, of course.
Yes.
Would Fatah have done it by themselves? At least up until now. In the old days, they did. They did all sorts of massacres, right? But once again, I think
No,
we
they
have
only
to look...
pay. They only pay the terrorists to do it, right?
I agree. They pay the
But
terrorists.
let me tell you something. You know what it reminds me
Yeah.
of? Okay,
I
know,
said
when you ask-
distinguish between
I
regrettable
understand.
but distinguishable.
Okay, wait a second. Do you distinguish between Jack the Ripper and the Boston Strangler? Which do you prefer? Well, one is bloodier.
Yeah.
The other one, I don't know. Would you like to be choked to death? I personally, that's how I see them. The Boston Strangler and Jack the Ripper. You choose.
So I think, and once again, I think the international community, by babysitting them so much, makes a mistake, yes? But if there's ever going to be peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon, I have a whole big question mark. I choose my words very carefully. If there's ever going to be moderate Palestinian leadership that will want to live in peace with Israel, it will not come out of Hamas. It could conceivably come out of a more moderate Palestinian political formation, maybe.
When apples grow on cherry trees, Mark, I'm going to remind
But having
you
said that, Israel has to be strong. If Israel's strong, there's no chance that we're ever going to get a peace deal. Or any peace is based, and that's why, going back to the thing we started with, I think it's very good for the country that more and more Haredim do their military service.
Okay, well, on that note, by the way, Mark, I think we had another interesting discussion this week. I would just like to say to the viewers one thing, that people seem to think, or people have said to me that, they think somehow that you and I are on the opposite side of the political and ideological spectrum. So I just want to clarify something. One of the reasons we argue a lot, I rarely argue with people who are completely on the other side because there's no point. We don't have any common ground. You and I actually have a similar general worldview about who the good guys and the bad guys are, and we argue over the details. And I think what's important about that is to show that actually, I think in Israel there's a lot more of that, of arguing people who actually agree and spend a lot of time arguing. And I think maybe that gets lost in this whole business of who's a hawk and a dove, who's a leftist and a rightist. That's what I think.
So I will summarize what you said in one sentence, okay?
Yeah.
I am, they say in Hebrew, I'm a bitchonist. I'm a security-minded, right-of-center individual who's very much a Zionist and believes that we have to be strong to survive in this tough neighborhood. You're basically a crazy right-winger.
That's me. I'm a crazy right-winger, but I just want to qualify that. I'm a right-wing bohemian, and don't forget it.
I never do. I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Ditto.